The first expense doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like a one-time inconvenience, a small disruption that you assume will correct itself next month. But then something else replaces it: a higher grocery bill, a delayed payment, a minor emergency. And slowly, without any clear turning point, your baseline cost of living begins to rise, while your financial flexibility quietly disappears. This is where the experience of being poor becomes structurally expensive, not because of a single large cost, but because of the accumulation of smaller constraints that limit your ability to make efficient decisions over time, forcing you into choices that prioritize immediacy over optimization, even when you understand the long-term trade-offs. At the center of this is a simple but often overlooked concept: access to time and options. Because money is not only a resource for purchasing goods, it is also a buffer that allows you to wait, compare, negotiate, and select better outcomes. And without that buffer, every decision becomes compressed into the present moment, where the cheapest option up front is often the most expensive option overall. Consider something as ordinary as replacing a broken appliance, where someone with savings can evaluate quality, compare warranties, and invest in a durable product that reduces future replacement cycles, while someone without that margin is forced to select the lowest upfront cost, even if it guarantees repeated failure, turning a single purchase into a recurring expense loop. This pattern extends into nearly every category of spending, from transportation to healthcare to food, where limited cash flow removes the ability to bulk buy, to access preventive care, or to invest in efficiency, and instead creates a cycle where each decision slightly increases future costs, reinforcing the very condition that caused the constraint in the first place. Over time, this creates what can be understood as a financial friction system, where each constraint adds resistance to progress, not in dramatic or visible ways, but through small, recurring inefficiencies that compound quietly, making upward movement slower and more difficult than it appears from the outside. There is also a psychological dimension that operates alongside the math, because repeated exposure to constrained choices changes how decisions are made, shifting focus towards short-term stability rather than long-term optimization, not as a lack of discipline, but as a rational adaptation to an environment where uncertainty is constant and margins are thin. This is why advice that assumes stable surplus often fails to translate, because it overlooks the cognitive load of scarcity, where each financial decision carries higher stakes and consumes more mental energy, reducing the capacity to plan beyond immediate needs and reinforcing reactive behavior patterns. If we break this down mathematically, the difference is not just in income levels, but in the cost per decision, where the same product or service effectively costs more when purchased under constraint, whether through higher interest rates, late fees, smaller quantities at higher unit prices, or repeated replacement cycles that inflate total expenditure over time. In this sense, poverty functions less like a static condition and more like a system with built-in penalties, where the absence of financial buffers introduces additional costs that are not immediately visible but become significant when viewed across longer time horizons. When we zoom out further, this system connects to broader economic structures, where pricing models, credit systems, and service access are often optimized for those who already have stability, creating a feedback loop where efficiency is rewarded with lower costs, while instability is penalized with higher ones. This does not require intentional design to exist, because even neutral systems can produce unequal outcomes when initial conditions differ, meaning that two individuals making equally rational decisions can experience very different financial trajectories simply due to their starting position. The result is a divergence that feels gradual rather than sudden, where one path benefits from compounding efficiency and the other absorbs compounding friction, and over time, this gap becomes increasingly difficult to close without a change in underlying conditions. What often shifts this dynamic is not a single large event, but the introduction of margin, even a modest buffer that allows decisions to move from reactive to deliberate, creating space for comparison, for planning, and for breaking small cycles that previously felt unavoidable. This is where the perception of cost begins to change, because once decisions are no longer constrained by immediacy, the true price of things becomes clearer, revealing how much was previously being paid not just in money, but in lost options and repeated inefficiencies. Understanding this does not eliminate the constraints, but it reframes them, shifting the focus from isolated decisions to the structure surrounding those decisions, and recognizing that what appears to be a series of small financial mistakes is often a predictable outcome of limited flexibility. In the end, the phrase, "being poor is expensive," is less a paradox and more a description of how systems behave under